Good morning. I am State Representative Ryan Williams. I'm here for a discussion with my good friend Senator Paul Bailey, who's running a few moments late, but he'll be joining us in a minute. Wanted to start usually Boys State by telling you a little bit about who I am. As I said, I'm Ryan Williams. I'm the state representative from the 42nd District, which is right here at the home of Tennessee Tech University. I represent 85% of Putnam County. I've been doing that since 2010. Serve currently on committees of finance, full committee, health, full committee, local full committee, local subcommittee on planning and finance subcommittee, as well as the appropriations subcommittee chair. So most of the business that I transact on behalf of my constituents in the state has to do with finance. A lot of that has to do with my tenure in the Tennessee General Assembly. As I said, I got elected in 2010. I will say that 88 members of the 99 members have served less time than I have. People always talk about term limits, and we have those in Tennessee, and particularly in the House of Representatives, and they're every 2 years, they're called elections. And so everyone can get beat every 2 years. But it's good to have some in the Tennessee General Assembly that have experience, and that's why I'm still there, as well as the members of the 42nd District, the electorate, send me there. As you know, being a state representative is a part-time job. My full-time job, I am in the construction business for a local commercial and industrial contractor named J&S Construction Company. They've been in business for 65 years. It's a family-owned business. I am their director of business development, which means I start with the original idea of a project and I see it all the way through to contract. I handle all the contractual obligations, the design engineering of the project, and all the estimating. And then once I sell the project, I hand it off to our fulfillment staff and I collaborate with them to deliver projects. The typical project for me is about $6 million. The largest project is $15 million. The smallest project is changing out a door in an industrial plant. So we like to pride ourselves on servicing all of our clients' needs. This year, I will be married to my wife, Abby, Cookeville native. She and I met at Carson Newman, and we've now been married for 25 years. We have 2 children, Tyson, who is a freshman at East Tennessee State University, studying civil engineering and construction, as well as a member of the men's soccer team there. My daughter, who is 17, will be a senior at Cookeville High School. She has not yet decided what she wants to do or where she wants to go, except for she is a full-time dance ballet associate or person at the Nashville School of Ballet. And so we drive there 5 days a week in order to give her the exposure she needs as it relates to dance. That's a little bit about me. My hobbies are fly fishing and hiking, but my passion is the beautiful game, which is soccer, which I played soccer in college as well. As my son, I went to Carson Newman, which is where I met my wife, was a 4-year athlete there. Graduated with a degree in biology, wanted to be in medicine because my whole family was in construction, and yet here I am in construction. And so that's a little bit about me. As I told you before, Senator Bailey is also joining me today to talk about the critical issues affecting Tennessee. But before we get started with those issues, Senator Bailey, welcome.
Thank you.
We are
Representative Williams.
Yeah. So eventually the TV screen will adjust, I think. But Senator Bailey, I just told him a little bit about how long I served in the House. Of course, I didn't tell him about the terms. A House member is elected every 2 years. Senator Bailey is much more senior than I am by a couple of years, and
only in age.
Yes, he serves in the Senate. And so he's going to tell a little bit about him, his background, what he does. As I said, this is not our full-time job. And then we'll jump right into the topics.
Sure. Okay. Absolutely. It's great to be with you. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. I had a conference call, as Ryan has probably covered. Tennessee legislators are actually part-time legislators, which means that we actually have a full-time job outside of serving the people of Tennessee. And so I had a business conference call I had to take care of before getting here. I've been in the trucking business for 37 years. I have 3 children. One just graduated last Monday. He's going to be attending Rhodes College in Memphis and playing football. Ron and I both are very fortunate to have children that have excelled far and above what I did. so we're happy to have
Get it from their mother.
They get absolutely. I serve on the Commerce and Labor Committee as chairman, as well as the Transportation and Safety Committee. I've been in the legislature. This is my 8th year. And so next year I'm up for re-election, and I'll be serving my 9th legislative session. Someone says, well, you're elected every 4 years. How are you serving your 9th year? I served 1 year in the House of Representatives in 2014 before being elected to serve in the Senate. I'm from Sparta, Tennessee, and just happy to be with you guys and look forward to your questions today.
One of the things that Senator Bailey didn't say is that he just recently had an accident, but it was only because he is a champion horse shower, I guess is a shower of horses. And so he and his whole family, equestrian, whatever he tried to give me an education about the other day, but yeah. I think it's important for people to know what your hobbies are.
Well, exactly. So, aside from my 2 sons being very active in playing football and basketball through their middle school and high school years, we also are a family that participate in quarter horse activities, and we're in the Western performance part of the horse industry. And so we compete on a national level. We go all across the country competing in competitions. And so what Ryan was referring to a few minutes ago, in February, I had a horse fall with me in a competition in Fort Worth, Texas, and it basically fractured my left radius with a spiral fracture, and then on my right radius, it was a complete break and actually went inward, and I had to have surgery. But we're back up. I'm actually rode horses this past weekend, so we're getting back to normal.
Yeah. One thing that makes him a good senator is he's pretty hard-headed too.
Well, I hit on my head first,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Saved your arms. But so they asked us to talk a little bit about some issues. I have a list of issues, Senator Bailey. I think a couple of these issues that are important to Tennessee and what happened this year in the Tennessee General Assembly. Some of these actually you're better suited probably to communicate about those than I am, but I thought I'd go through the list and then we'll kind of tag team a little bit on those. First of all, which one I know Senator Bailey was really heavily involved with was unemployment insurance reform. He serves as the chairman of the Commerce Committee in the Senate. It's one of the most powerful committees there because of so much business that transacts in our state. And so I'm going to tell that to you. Other issues we had a mental health trust fund this year, which really impacts K-12 students. I think it was really important. We'll talk a little bit about that. There was also lots of money spent in rural broadband, which is a huge thing. It's a very important way. COVID has shown us that having access to broadband is a really important component of being able to educate students, which I think was really important. We also made investments in our cities and counties, which was really important in result of COVID. We also had some what I call social issues that were very interesting. The idea of concept of women playing in women's sports was very controversial because there are transgender athletes in NCAA and other areas that are participating in women's sports. And so there's a lot of lawsuits going on regarding that. Tennessee was proactive in passing laws relating that. We also had some issues as it relates to fetal remains with abortions, was an interesting discussion, a bill that did pass the House. And then 2 other issues I think that might be important to you all is a discussion, and particularly in education, around critical race theory or 1619 Project, which is interesting. And then finally, the governor came out with a bill this year as it relates to constitutional carry. One thing Senator Bailey and I, the last 9 years, been doing this together. It seems to always be a discussion about the Second Amendment here at Boise State. And so we're happy to do that. But before I take the next one, I thought maybe you'd tell a little bit about what unemployment insurance, why it was important, the reforms that we did because of COVID, how that great that impact was.
Yes. So in reference to Representative Williams talking about unemployment insurance, currently an individual that's on unemployment can draw up to 26 weeks of unemployment. That's basically state law. One of the things that we realized, and we've been hearing from our business community over the last several months, is that people are not returning back to work the way that they should, and they're continuing to take advantage of those additional weeks. So there was legislation that we passed at the end of session, which reduced that number of weeks down to 12 weeks if the unemployment rate is 5.5% and lower, which we're currently at 5.5% unemployment today. So as long as it stays at that rate or lower, then the recipient would receive 12 weeks of unemployment. Each time that the unemployment rate would increase, then it would add an additional week onto the number of weeks and bringing it all the way up to 20 weeks if the rate went up to, say, unemployment rate went up to 9%, and it would be adjusted twice per year. We also put in $50 additional. Currently, state unemployment recipient receives $275. With the reform that we passed, it will allow someone to receive $325. So yes, the number of weeks have been reduced, but the benefit that they would be receiving on a weekly basis would be increased.
Yeah. Now, this is really important because unemployment insurance reform hasn't been done in over 20 years. We did in part increase the allotment at the high end as it relates by increase the amount that you can receive. The dollar amount you can receive by $50. That was a change the Senate made in conference committee, which I think was really important. But I think the impetus here is that the reason for the graduated change is because as the scarcity of jobs increases, so does the duration of unemployment benefit, which is really good. But what people don't realize is that prior to COVID, we had $1.4 billion in the unemployment trust fund. And within 6 months, we had spent $900 million of that $1.4 million. Right. So in order to stay solvent, we had to look at some kind of reform in case something like COVID or another tragedy were to befall our citizens. So Senator Bailey's work on that was very important. And so I appreciate him doing that. I will change a little bit to one of the discussions that we had around cities and counties. Putnam County and my district and really in the Upper Cumberland per se, the sales tax and hotel motel tax returns were pretty good in spite of COVID. And that was mainly in part to 4 years ago, we passed internet sales tax reform so that, as you may or may not know, when your parents bought things 4 years ago, if they bought it online, there was no sales tax.
Right.
And so what happened, we made that change. So if you buy something online or in a retail box store, it's the sales tax is the same. And so the good news is it wasn't that bad, but the big problem is it didn't allow our cities to grow. So last year, Governor Lee and the legislature put $100 million in for cities and counties. We did that again this year. We put that money was originally proposed by the governor to be $200 million, but it was encumbered. It was delayed until January of next year. And so it really wasn't going to be much of a benefit to cities and counties. And so that's one of the reasons why we did this. And so places like Putnam County or Williamson County, Metro Nashville or Shelby County or Memphis City, they're going to get an allotment. The large metros are capped at $5 million, but they'll get an allotment of money of which they can use unencumbered for infrastructure and roads and different things, which is really, really important to our local governments. And so that was one of the things that we did this year. It was a little bit controversial because we reduced the number, but we unencumbered it more. So most of the cities and counties appreciated it better.
And Ryan, if you don't mind, let me jump in about the internet sales tax. So it's zip code specific. So that's one of the reasons during the pandemic and when businesses were shut down and other than your big box stores, you still saw your local governments in most places in Tennessee still have positive revenue, or at least the same amount of revenue that they had from the previous year. So it's all due to the internet sales tax. So if someone ordered something from California whenever it was shipped to Tennessee and the sales tax was collected, then it actually went to the local government. It went to the city if you lived inside the city limits, and a portion went to the county. If you lived in the county, then the sales tax portion went to the county. The other, if you remember, Ryan, we originally, a company had to have $500,000 in sales into Tennessee before we collected it. And then we just had reduced that down to 100,000. So that's one of the reasons that you saw Tennessee isolated as far as our revenue growth. And the reason that we were able to come back and do the things that we were doing this year is simply because we had the foresight several years ago in collecting the internet sales tax.
Well, and I think just to piggyback on what Senator Bailey said, out of the 50 states in the United States during COVID, only seven out of the 50 states grew their economy through COVID. Tennessee was one of those. Yeah. And so I think it is in large part internet sales tax because people could stay at home, practice social distancing, and still do the shopping that they need in order to do that. But I want to transition real quick, Senator Bailey. One of the things that you're very passionate about that you were actually also involved with was the $100 million broadband. I know we spent we spent almost $100 million in the 4 previous years in rural broadband extension. The federal government, as part of their CARES Act, spent another $61 million in Tennessee as it relates to rural broadband. Maybe you can give them a primer on what that money means, how it can impact their communities and in rural Tennessee in particular, since Senator Bailey represents more rural counties than any other senator.
Well, again, so the governor, he had originally proposed $200 million to go into broadband expansion. And basically the legislature came back and said, look, let's do $100 million this year. We'll carry over the $100 million because we didn't want to flood the service providers with so much money that they just couldn't basically provide the service. And so we thought we would step it out and do 100 million this year, 100 million next year. But what that means to your rural communities, if you're from a Jackson County or a Pickett County, or if you're from a Henderson County or a Weakley County or a Unicoi County or somewhere that's rural in Tennessee, this money will help incentivize either a rural telephone co-op. It'll also help incentivize. We gave electric companies electric co-ops the ability to start installing fiber throughout the state of Tennessee. So any service areas or any areas that were not serviced by internet, hopefully with this additional money that's coming from the state as well as the federal government, will be able to provide better internet coverage and fiber to the premise, actually.
Yeah, and so one of the big challenges that face us is as we begin to extend rural broadband to more people around rural Tennessee, the big challenge that we're going to have going forward is getting people to take it.
Right.
I think you can have access, but sometimes your family can't afford it. So we got to find ways to make it more affordable. By doing this, we hope that it becomes more affordable because the government is subsidizing, quite frankly, these businesses in order to do that. Because we still have people in Jackson County that'll drive to Starbucks in Putnam County just to get free Wi-Fi.
And Ron, sometimes people forget Williamson County is the most affluent county in the state of Tennessee, but Governor Lee is from Williamson County. He doesn't have internet service at his own farm and where he lives. So it's amazing that the governor of the state of Tennessee, living in the most affluent county in the state of Tennessee, still doesn't have broadband. And so, yes, we talk about rural counties and we talk about the counties that are maybe not as affluent as Williamson County, but when we have the most affluent county in the state still having pockets where there's not internet coverage, this is something that will definitely be a game changer.
Right. And so we're about halfway through the list that we were going to do it. I noticed that there's no questions on the live chat. I don't know if someone's told you, or I should have said that. Maybe we should say, if you have questions, we're going to take questions at the end. So if you want to put those in the live chat, we've got someone here off the camera that's way smarter than us, and she can make sure that we understand what the questions are. But you might want to do that. Senator Bailey, I'm going to tell them a little bit about the Mental Health Trust Fund, and then I thought maybe you could follow up with constitutional carry. The Mental Health Trust Fund is something the governor proposed prior to COVID. Because of COVID, though, we had to strip down the budget, get lean and mean, and figure out what the world was going to look like post-COVID. And so the governor brought this back this year. What it was is a trust fund is a little bit different. $250 million we set aside, plus an additional $25 million of first-time money this year to extend mental health services to every K-12 campus and county or school system across the state. One of the things that I'm very passionate about, I have 2 teenagers and their friends. I think Jordan and Aiden are watching online, some of my daughter's friends. One of the things we hear about as our kids are in high school is the mental health of students is at an all-time low. The attempted suicide and suicide rate among kids 15 to 20 has grown 100% in the last 2 years. COVID only exacerbated that problem. It made it very difficult for students, and particularly already struggling with their heads too much in the phone and not enough communicating with one another and learning those soft skills that are really important and building relationships. And so the governor saw this. Many of you may or may not know, I read in his book, after his wife passed away from a horseback riding accident, his daughter attempted suicide. It was something that dramatically changed his life. And he feels like that it was something that he felt like that we needed to really address and take a strong stance against. And so in your schools starting next year, you'll see this original investment of $20 million, as well as an ongoing investment using the interest off that $250 million to continue to fund these programs so that we can work with people like Suicide Prevention of Tennessee and others to make sure that students are getting the help they need. And quite frankly, sometimes all it is a teacher or an administrator or a coach or somebody who has the opportunity to have a listening ear and understand the problems that are facing students today. This is a huge problem. And I would take that time really to say to you now is, if you're feeling thoughts about hurting yourself, reach out to a professor, reach out to your neighbor, reach out to someone and share that what's going on. We'll help you get the help that you need. Unfortunately, there is a stigma as it relates to mental health. We've seen a lot of athletes and professional athletes come out recently sharing that their own personal experience as it relates to mental health. Mental health exists in my mother's side of the family. It's very important that you communicate about it. You're definitively not alone. I know sometimes in mental health, you might think that you're alone, but in this instance, you're not. And so we want to make sure that we're available for you at any time. And so hopefully we'll be able to change the tide and begin to go back to the way it was prior to COVID, but definitely better than it has been in the last 3 years. That being said, Senator Bailey, you want to talk a little bit about constitutional carry, the governor's bill, and what that means? So
this year, the governor proposed and the legislature passed a form of constitutional carry, which means that if you are 21 and above, you can carry open or concealed. It's a carry. It's just basically constitutional carry. Some states have a concealed carry law. Some people have open carry. Tennessee just has a carry law in place now, constitutional carry law, which means that you can, as long as you're 21 and above, or if you're in the military, you're 18 years old. And if you're in the military, then you can also carry. It comes with stiff penalties. Previously, if you were caught carrying and you did not have a permit, it was a misdemeanor. This time with the constitutional carry, we passed making it a felony with a minimum of 6 months incarceration, especially if you steal a firearm. Also, if you are convicted of any type of stalking or domestic abuse, you can lose your right to be able to carry. But this was a step forward. This is something that Governor Lee had promised when he was running for governor, that he wanted to see Tennessee be a constitutional carry state. And so this year, the legislature went forward with passing that legislation.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Tennessee was one of the few states to not do constitutional carry in a while. It's been attempted several times. I think, most of us on the R side or on the red side of the state believe that a constitutional amendment it speaks for itself. I think in this instance, I do think one clarification is that one revision that we had to this is it doesn't apply to long guns. So if you want to take your AR, your 270, your 243, or whatever your long gun is, you can't carry that in open carry or concealed carry in the state. It's only for handguns. And so I think that's one of the people that were against this, saying it wasn't constitutional, true constitutional carry, were saying that. The truth of the matter is, I carry a gun, but I don't carry a gun open, because when you give away the concealment of it, you make your citizens less safe. I think it's best if no one knows that you have it. One of the other things that, as I said, there were two social issues, one related.
Right. Let's just make sure that everyone understands also on the constitutional carry. If an employer or a government building or business posts that there's no firearms, they still have to abide by that request.
Exactly. So if I go, for instance, if I come to Tennessee Tech, it's posted here, you can't, it's a campus, so you couldn't carry on Tennessee Tech's campus. There is something called campus carry where you can carry on campuses, but there's a whole process by which you have to go through. But because Tennessee Tech prohibits it, you can't carry even if you're 21.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
That's true. Yeah, that's great. Two social issues that we were going to talk about a little bit about. I'm going to talk about fetal remains, abortion, very controversial. I was in the health committee in the House. It came through there, also came through finance. It's an interesting discussion. And then I was going to let you talk about women's sports mainly, since if you want to do that, great. If not, I'll do that too. But the bill that the House passed this year, ironically, in the state of Tennessee, if you have an animal that dies on your farm,
right,
there are laws applied to you through Department of Ag, USDA, what you have to do as it relates to dispose of a hog or chickens or horses or whatever. But when you abort a child in Tennessee, you can put it in medical waste bag and send it to a disposal, or you can quite frankly put it in a landfill. This is something the legislature didn't know was going on, but it was going on in the state and surrounding states. And so all the bill did was, if you didn't limit someone's ability to have an abortion if they wanted to, obviously we have many laws on the books as it relates to abortion and things that are legal and things that are not. All it said, though, is if you had an abortion and that the entity that performed the abortion, not the individual who sought the abortion, but the medical clinic or the hospital, would have to incinerate the remains or pay for the burial of the remains as a part of that abortion. We just felt like in the legislature that how we handle all human beings as should be treated at least on the same level as the animals that we treat, and that we should treat them as such. And so very controversial bill, lots of discussion around it, very passionate debate. I was in the health committee, and it was unbelievable, the things, quite frankly, that we heard and saw. And so we feel like this is the best way to honor those and do it respectfully, those children's whose lives were taken. And so I'll go ahead and talk about the other, since it came through unless you want to.
No, that's fine. Either one.
Okay, so the other bill was, as you know, the NCAA is allowing for students in the NCAA to, if they are transgender students, to be able to participate in women's sports. There's several lawsuits regarding that. The Tennessee General Assembly, and working with the TSSAA, simply codified in statute that if you're going to participate, that you participate in the sex of what was on your birth certificate. So if you were born a male, you participate in male sports. If you were born a female genetically, you would participate in female sports. And so regardless of how that how you perceive or what sex you perceive yourself to be at the time is irrelevant. It really is based upon your birth status. And so it was very controversial. There were some that said it was impunitive towards those transgender folks in our communities. And that's quite frankly not the case. We have spent decades protecting Title IX women's sports, in particularly in NCAA. The whole existence of women's sports today was based in high school was based upon the fact that we wanted to give women the opportunity to compete in athletics on a level playing field and not just have to compete against women. We saw, or not men. We saw, though, the NCAA allowed Vanderbilt kicker, women's soccer player, fantastic player, to play men's sports. They in K-12, you can still do that. A female can still play in a boys' sports, I think, based upon this law. And so it was controversial. There were a few. I think there were, according to the Tennessee statistics, there are 6,000 students across the state that consider themselves transgender out of over 1 million. And so it'll be interesting to see how this is implemented over the next year. But I think what it does more than anything is it preserves the effort and the work and the commitment of every woman, a young girl in the state as it relates to what they want to do. And so, and they're not having to compete against those that are genetically disposed to different strengths than they have. And so that's a little bit about what that does. Is there anything else you could
Well,
think?
I would just like to, I think you brought up a good point in the fact that, we've seen male sports have female athletes compete in those sports. And so this does nothing to limit those people from, or those individuals from being able to play in football, or, we brought up about the Vanderbilt kicker and so forth.
Right.
Obviously that's college sports, and our bill dealt strictly with middle school and high school sports, but still it still allows those individuals, if they want to enter into a male sport, the females can certainly do that.
Yeah. So those were the main issues. We could come up with some more. I don't know. Were there any questions?
We have some questions.
Okay.
Oh, wonderful.
This is our favorite part. The whole reason why we come is so that we can take questions. And Paul Bailey will take all the hard questions because he's a senator.
So Delegate Lucas Buckner would like to know what inspired you to become involved in politics and government, and what did you do, if anything, to prepare yourself for this profession?
Yeah, that is good. So thinking back to whenever I was your age and even a little bit younger, I always had an interest in politics, and ran for 4-H president in my 4th grade class. And so I'd always had a passion for politics. And so was student council president my senior year of high school. Actually ran for student government senator whenever I was at Tennessee Tech. Unfortunately, I didn't win, but at the same time, I was entering into the family business. And so I was spending a lot more time working in the business than probably I was in school books, but nevertheless. But I think that at the end of the day, you have to have a heart and a passion to want to help people, because you hear a lot about the legislation that we've just discussed today and how it affects people's lives. But what you're not hearing is the people that are calling you that need TennCare assistance, which is our Medicaid program. Or you hear from families, since we passed the Katie Beckett waiver, allowing families that have children that are severely disabled that need 24/7 care. And now Tennessee has been granted the Katie Beckett waiver, helping those families get that needed assistance. So you have to have a heart to serve the people. And I think that it's not always glamorous, if you will. A lot of the things that we help our constituents with state government. But I think that's one of the most fulfilling things for me is whenever a constituent calls and they have a true need and we're able to meet that need for them.
Yeah, I think for me, a little bit different story. I think for me, it was one of those things where my wife used to say, if good people don't run, then we get what we get. And so I never ran for political office, never did that. I think a lot of it had to do with growing up with a mullet. I think people's expectations. But right now, I started reading a new book, Pursuit, Faithful Presence, is Bill Haslam, former governor, that Senator Bailey and I started reading this book. He and I used to joke all the time. It's like being in elected office is like being a pastor. You're in the care of souls, but people's expectations of you are really low. And so I think of public service a lot like that. Most of the greatest public servants I've ever met in politics are those people that didn't get in it because they wanted to. They really felt like that they could make a difference in their community. And there may be a seminal issue that they jumped into that kind of got their appetite whet, and then it's service. But it is definitely service above self. You're not doing it for the pay. We didn't say that. I mean, it's $19,000 a year. It takes up a quarter of your year. It costs about $12,000 to $14,000 to do it. So you're losing money. But it's definitely about service. And so I thought I'd answer that one real quick. Maybe I'll answer this one, and then he can answer it. Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
So the next question is from Delegate Adrian Morak. He asked, is it difficult for you to be able to voice your opinions and go with your morals when it disagrees with the ideals of your party?
Adrian, did my daughter ask you to ask that question? No, I'm just kidding. Adrian, thanks for the question. Adrian is here from Putnam County. It is very difficult. I think a lot of times, I think what we do is we all have our own view. You know, your view is based upon your own personal experience. And in my instance, it's a biblical worldview. I see the world based upon the scripture, and it's kind of a guiding light for me as it relates to the decisions I make. And sometimes in scripture, it calls us to take care of people that need our help. And that's not necessarily that's usually something that means it costs money. And sometimes my colleagues don't like the idea of spending money, that people should be like them and pull themselves up from their bootstraps. But I think there's usually a balance. There's never really a right answer, I don't think, as it relates to policymaking, but there is the best answer. And you have to be able to walk away knowing that you got the best answer that you got for the certain subject matter that day. And in hindsight, I'll only tell whether it was a great one or not. But being willing to go back and say I was wrong and change it is one of the benefits to being in this as well. Because we do, every year we have 15 or 20 bills where we fixed what we screwed up the year before.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would just say, somewhat relative to your question, from the time that I ran for a state senate, there was principles that I said that should never change. Number one, never do anything that's going to dishonor God. Number two, don't do anything never do anything in politics that's going to dishonor your family. And thirdly, never do anything that's going to dishonor your constituents. And so there are times that you're in Nashville and you look at legislation and you have to make sure you weigh it out and that it fits within those categories, as far as that you're not going to do anything that that God would be dishonored by passing legislation. And certainly we hear all the time about politicians getting involved in things that they shouldn't be involved in, whether it be a moral issue or they've stolen money from the department that they work in, but at the same time, just never do anything that's going to dishonor God, your family, or your constituents.
Mm-hmm.
This next one's a two-parters from two different delegates. So Alexander DeRose would like to know if there's going to be any more gun safety programs put in place with constitutional carry implemented. And Ian Parsons would like for you to explain the penalties for violating constitutional carry again.
Okay. I'll start with the first one, I guess. As it relates to gun safety, the governor put $250,000 in the budget this year as it relates to gun safety, be able to teach people gun safety in schools, K-12. I think it's really important. We passed a bill 2 years ago that allowed schools in order to be able to teach some kind of safety curriculum. This was not necessarily how to use a fire gun, how to fire a gun, how to use a gun, how to load a gun. This is more what do you do if you find a gun? Who do you call? What do you say? What is the policy behind doing that? I think it's important that we do that. I think the second thing that we did in addition to doing constitutional carry that's safety related is we decided to cut the sales tax on any purchase of any safety mechanism or product as it relates to guns. So for instance, if you wanted to buy a fingerprint safe to set beside your bedstand to preserve and make sure that your kids didn't get involved, didn't use the gun, tax-free. If you wanted to buy a safe to house your guns in, that would be tax-free. Gun locks, that would be tax-free. The reason for doing that is we want to be able to say, hey, that we're a constitutional carry state. We've recognized and preserved that right. But we also want to be able to say we need to be good stewards of this responsibility. And so I think it's the marriage of both of those. Do you want to talk about the penalties, or do you want me to?
Well, I mean, go ahead. I mean, if you want
the penalties, the penalties really were not that egregious. There were three things that if you violated, there were two things in particular that I think that were interesting. Those proponents of constitutional carry did not like these two things. One was if you were convicted of being a stalker, if you stalked someone, and you were convicted of stalking, you don't have the right to carry, have constitutional carry. which means it's not true constitutional carry, which why some proponents didn't like it. But generally speaking, if somebody is stalking someone, they're usually someone who does a heinous act towards the person in which they're stalking. And so this was a Class E misdemeanor, is punishable. It's a Class E felony, punishable by 1129 and fines. You lose your handguns as well. I think that was one that was in particular. And then if you were to carry a long gun and you didn't have a permit to carry it, that you also would do that. But then the other is if we strengthen the laws as it relates to if you're carrying a handgun, you're a convicted felon, then you in fact would also have to do time for that as a part of our whole judicial sentencing reform that we did this year. You would have to serve 100% of that time. So it's an impediment to people that those that are law-abiding community citizens, their right to be preserved. Those who are not acting in a safe way towards others, they're going to be punished for it.
Yeah, and also to mention, we touched on this earlier when we were talking about this, but if you've been convicted of DUI recently, and or if you have been sent to a mental institution by a court of law, then you're not eligible to for constitutional carry as well.
Okay, so we only have time for 2 more questions, though there are several in the chat.
I'm going to do a follow-up question, gentlemen. This is Jason Murphy speaking off camera, the chairman for Boys State. And I know that a lot of our delegates, and even I have my youngest son especially, are hunters.
Yeah.
And we hunt with long guns, of course. So can you please touch? I'm sure that's a question of some of them, because I know constitutional carries for handguns, which I'm a carrier as well and a huge proponent of our Second Amendment rights. But what is the proper way to carry a gun to a hunting location if you're turkey or deer hunting?
Yeah, well, so your vehicle, we have what's called the Castle Doctrine in the state of Tennessee, which applies to your home, your vehicle, your boat. And so to Mr. Murphy's point, when you're going to a hunt, you're in your pickup or you're in your car, you can carry that long rifle with you because you are in your personal vehicle. That even extends to a rental vehicle if you have a rental vehicle. So it is totally lawful for you to be able to carry that firearm or that long gun with you to a hunt. The issue is that you can't carry that long gun with you on the street or out in public as to go armed. That's where the difference comes in.
That's a good clarification. Good question from Director Murphy.
So I think we have time for one more question. It's from Jake Officer, and he asked, how do you balance what the state wants done and what the needs of the state are versus what the federal government wants and tries to pass, i.e. the federal government tried to overturn Tennessee's constitutional carry?
Well, I think obviously one of the things you learn about in Boys State is separation between the federal bureaucracy and that of the states and what it means to have states' rights. There are issues that the federal government has opined upon. Senator Bailey and I this year attempted to pass a very controversial bill, of which I might be ashamed to even mention since Judge Maddox just walked in the door. But I will say that what this bill would have done was it would have taken the Solicitor General's office out of the Attorney General's office, and they would work at the will of the legislature and not like the Attorney General at the will of the governor or of the Attorney General himself. They would still collaborate on business, but what it would be is it would give the Solicitor General the authority to sue in federal court over issues of states' rights that the states disagreed with the federal bureaucracy upon. So it doesn't matter if it's abortion law or marriage law or constitutional carry laws. These laws then would give us an opportunity to be able to advocate or argue based upon Tennessee's 3-starred identity apart from the other 50 states or 49 states in the United States. It is a very difficult way to do it. Sometimes it's quite frankly, it's disheartening because you might work for 2 or 3 years on a bill, finally get it passed because it's what the will of the people is in Tennessee, only to have it appealed to or adjudicated in the courts and the law then therefore repealed. So we've seen that with voucher bills, right to work bills and things like that over the years. But I think it's really important to understand to stay in our lane. It also makes it very important as it relates to who we send. But I do who we send to the federal bureaucracy. But I do think we're at an unfortunate time in politics in America where, and particularly in Washington, there's just, we used to say it was gridlock, but now it's just obstinance. I mean, it's just old ornery obstinance. People unwilling to communicate and work with each other. We don't have that problem in Tennessee. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle and we work well together. And I think this obstinance is really detrimental to the process, but more importantly, it's detrimental to the future of our nation. And until we fix that, I think we're in trouble.
Yeah. So let me follow up on something relative to the question that Ryan's talked about. So Tennessee, once the administration changed in Washington and we started hearing about executive orders being signed relative to gun control. Another reason why we push forward with constitutional carry in the state of Tennessee, because we don't want the federal government telling the state what they can and cannot do, especially when it's even in our state's constitution that you have the right to bear arms. A second was relative to the transgender issue. The federal government and the current administration is basically saying that it's okay that if you want to change your sex and still be able to be a male and compete in female. So those are just two examples of where the state was trying to be proactive, where the current state legislature felt like that the federal government was trying to overreach. Back to the Solicitor General. So the Tennessee is represented by the Attorney General. Yes, there is a Solicitor General inside the Attorney General's office. But I'll bring to you that sometimes the Attorney General is faced with a situation to where he's trying to represent the governor and he's also trying to represent the legislature. And I'll bring the Nathan Bedford Forrest bust to that point. The speakers of the House and the Senate asked the Attorney General for an opinion as to whether or not the Historical Commission and the State Capitol Commission could remove the Nathan Bedford Forrest bust. Well, that put the Attorney General at odds basically with one or the other, and his opinion basically come back
opinionless.
And so if Ryan and I are able to push forward with the Solicitor General bill, the Solicitor General would be doing the will of the legislature and the intent of the legislature, and where the Attorney General would still be the attorney, so to speak, for the state of Tennessee, but we would have that counsel that would be advocating on behalf of the legislature, the will and the intent of the legislature, and also being able to push back on any federal overreach that we felt like that the federal government was trying to push down on Tennessee.
Well, we got to land the plane. I know there's a lot of you that send out emails. We appreciate you. By the way, congratulations on this great honor. Even though it's virtual, it's one of the greatest things to put on a resume to say you're a member of Boy State for your year. And so if you have other questions that you have for Senator Bailey and his email address is sen, just like short for senator.
Now that's SEN, not SI.
Yeah. Which sen.paul.bailey@capital.tn.gov. And if you spell it with an OL, it's the right thing. If it's AL, it has to do with money. And mine is REP, short for representative, .ryan.williams@capital.tn.gov. We really appreciate being with y'all today. God bless you. You live in the greatest state in these United States, and you should be honored for it. So,
yeah,
thank you.
See you guys.